Hello, my name is Gav Cross, and I'm a storyteller, and I love reading Victorian supernatural stories, gothic, horror. I read them live on Twitch on a Monday night at 9 p.m, and then I pop them here on YouTube for you. I really enjoy your comments, and thank you for your likes and subscriptions. They really help get these stories seen by other people. Perhaps you've got a request. Pop one in the chat. I'm always interested. Today's reading is from the first Corgi book of great Victorian horror stories, The Reign of Terror. It's The Forsaken of God by William Mudford. "For heaven's sake, Frederick, do not go," exclaimed the terrified Adolphine, holding her brother by the arm to detain him. "Why not?" replied Frederick. "If Herman can do his part, I'll be sworn to go through mine." "'Tis unholy, 'tis hellish, 'tis an impious daring of the Almighty. You shall not go," said Adolphine. "My blood curdles at my heart to think only of what you have said." "Why, look you, Adolphine," answered Frederick, laughing as he disengaged himself gently from the clinging arms of his sister. "What is it, after all? Herman says he can raise the dead, and I say, if he can, I am he that will hold a parley with the dead, a conference such as living man ne'er yet had." "Oh, God!" exclaimed Adolphine, covering her eyes with her hands and shuddering as she spoke. "The bare imagination of it is horrible." "Shall I tell you a secret?" continued Frederick. "I believe Herman less able to perform his part than I mine." "Still, it is a sinful mockery, if it be only mockery," said Adolphine. The deep, heavy bell of the cathedral struck 11. Frederick, starting up, threw his cloak round him, put on his hat, and prepared to quit the house. "I've not a moment to play with now," he said. "Herman expects me before 12, and it is a long walk to where he lives." Do not go!" exclaimed Adolphine in a tone of earnest supplication, as she once more flung herself upon his bosom to detain him. "By my faith, I must. If Herman has spoken truly, he has ere this gone through pains and torments to vex the graves which are to yield up their pale inhabitants for my pleasure, and I dare not trifle with. Besides, would he not ever despise me as a coward, big of speech but faint of resolution, should I leave to him the boast of having prepared a scene which I was too sick at heart to look upon? Tomorrow, with the dawn, I shall return, and then, Adolphine, and then it will be time to tell her more. Thou loitering babbler," exclaimed a voice, whose freezing breath fell upon the ear of Frederick like an icy current of keen winter air. He alone heard it. He started and shivered at the mysterious rebuke. The next moment he's on his way to Herman's dwelling in the mountains, and Adolphine was on her knees, praying fervently for his safety. Herman and Frederick were fellow students in one of the German universities. It matters little which one, as little when the compact we are describing was made, whether a century or 2 centuries ago. It was made, for its history is extant. Herman, who was older by some years than Frederick, was reputed to be deeply skilled in the law of necromancy and magic, and to have acquired the fearful power of controlling the spirits of darkness, so as to make them work his will. Whether he really possessed this power, no one knew, though everyone asserted it, and Herman himself did not deny it. It chanced on one occasion, when he and Frederick were walking through a churchyard, the latter, who delighted in strange wild fancies, observed, as he paused to survey the tombs around them, "If a man now could bid these graves yawn and cast forth their dead to be questioned of what they once were and what they are, and they constrained to answer truly whatever might be demanded of them, God of heaven, what marvellous secrets we should learn. As how? Inquired Herman. Oh, I think ye not that we should find innocents that had bled upon the scaffold for unacted crimes, murder and sacrilege and robbery, and sin of every kind, dying on beds of down, cousining to the last all but heaven and a howling conscience? Should we not see hearts broken by secret griefs that never were told to mortal ears, fathers and mothers killed by their unnatural children, the young and beautiful withered by love's perjuries, poison and steel, shortening the years that lay between her heirs and their inheritance, and all these undiscovered villainies smuggled out of the world with certificates of old age, consumption, apoplexy, from grave physicians who take fees to give names to what they cannot cure. Herman mused in silence. Here, continued Frederick, planting his foot upon a new-made grave, here lies one who but yesterday was laid in the earth, perhaps. Imagine I could say to him or her, arise, that I could call back speech and memory to the dull clod that I could hold in my hand as a book, the heart that has ceased to throb. Should I not read there something which the world had never read during all the long years it dwelt in it? "'Tis an odd fancy, Frederick," exclaimed Herman. "A very odd fancy. Since when has such a notion possessed you?" "Since my mother died," replied Frederick emphatically. "And she died?" "Oh, ask the doctor. I tell you, 'twas of atrophy, and prove it by his art. I laughed amid my tears to hear them talk, and then it was I first thought how the dead would answer for themselves." "Let us go," said Herman. They quitted the churchyard. Many times afterwards the two friends discoursed upon this theme, which Herman could not banish from his thoughts, and one evening, when they were passing through the same churchyard, he thus addressed Frederick. "Do you remember our conversation here some months ago?" "I do, and our frequent ones since." "I can perform the thing you wish." "Would you were able," answered Frederick. "I can do it." "What?" "Lay open these graves." "Pooh!" exclaimed Frederick, laughing. "Come along, Herman. You are making sport of me." "Hear me," said Herman, remaining fixed to the spot where he stood. "I am not, as you imagine, merrily disposed, but I mean to use no persuasion, no argument with you. Simply, and in plain words, I repeat, I can lay these graves open and command the dust and ashes they contain to take forms of life, even the very shapes they bore when living." "Thou canst do this?" "This and more. They shall reveal to you those marvellous secrets you spoke of." "Herman!" exclaimed Frederick, looking at his friend with an eye that flashed horrible delight. "Herman, swear that you will do this. Swear by some oath, terrible as the thing itself, and I will pawn my soul to the eternal enemy of man for the pledge of my part in it." "There needs nor oath nor plight to bind the willing and the bold. I am the first. Are you the second?" "Here is my hand. What shall it be?" replied Frederick. "We will settle that as we walk along," answered Herman. They did settle it, and the night was now come in which Frederick was to be convinced, for he doubted to the last whether Herman could really perform his fearful feat of sorcery. He arrived at his house later than the time appointed in consequence of the delay occasioned by Adolphine's entreaties to forego the meeting altogether, and Herman was looking out for him. He returned to his room, followed by Frederick. "I'd work for nothing," said he angrily, "had I not gone beyond the need of this night's labour to break the spell of a fond girl. Are these matters that women should know? Adolphine is on her knees still, and her prayers have a holiness in them that thwarts and disturbs my purpose. But I can perform. I can perform," he muttered to himself as he rolled something in the palms of his hands that emitted sparks of a crimson hue with a loud crackling. I can. Bravely. And he increased the rolling motion of his hands. Her eyes close. Her head droops. 'Tis the sound of sleep. It will last till the lark sings. As he uttered these words, his hands unclosed. The palms were of a deep blood-red colour. There was no visible appearance of any substance that had been rubbed between them. Frederick remembered the freezing voice that had rebuked him, and no longer doubted of Hermann's power. If he could thus hold communion with the living, why might not the dead be subject to his art? The room was lighted by a single taper, which burned thick and duskily. On a table in the middle of it lay several open books, traced with strange characters and encircled with the skeletons of birds, reptiles, and animals. The appearance of Hermann himself was so strangely altered that Frederick could scarcely recognise him. His face was pallid, even to ghastliness. His arms were naked to the elbow, his long black hair knotted, and his tall, gaunt figure enveloped in a robe made from the skin of a leopard. The girdle by which it was fastened looked like twisted snakes, for there was a constant heaving and writhing of it about his body. Frederick noted these things while Hermann was speaking. When he ceased, he said, with an air of gaiety, I like your dress vastly, Hermann. 'Tis excellent masquerade, but am I not too to be equipped for this great occasion? There hangs thy robe, replied Hermann, pointing with his finger. Frederick started. Was it Hermann that had spoken, or was it a voice creaked from the bony lungs of death itself? He turned round in the direction of the pointed finger. Again he started, recoiling several paces. An arm merely, joined to no body, was extended behind him, holding a winding sheet. The flesh was upon it, but livid and in corruption, and there it hung, suspended in mid-air, balanced and supported he knew not how, offering him a shroud that had the soil of the grave upon it. There needs nor oath nor plight to bind the willing and the bold, said Hermann, in the same unearthly tone. I am the first. Art thou the second? Aye, responded Frederick. Thou hast my word, Hermann, but 'tis past questioning time now, interrupted Hermann. The dead are waiting for us, and we must go. Quick, clothe thyself. Frederick rallied from his trepidation and, advancing with a resolute step, plucked the winding sheet from the spectre hand. At the same moment was heard a low, wailing sound, which continued till he had folded round his creeping flesh the sepulchral garment. The horrible half-decayed arm remained. Hermann drew from his bosom a charmed glove, woven of the down that lines the screech owl's wings. He gave it to Frederick. That must with us, said he, pointing to the arm, but at the touch of living flesh it will dissolve to putrid jelly. Put on this, grasp it boldly, and all is done till we stand in the churchyard. Frederick did as he was commanded, without uttering a word. He put on the charmed glove, he grasped the arm. It had substance, it was heavy, and so chilling cold that it benumbed his own, as if it were solid ice. His teeth chattered, his body shook. The shroud struck a freezing shudder through his veins, and this seemed to heighten it. He looked at Hermann. He would have spoken, but his lips were rigid, as unapt for motion as the marble lips of a statue. From this moment until sunrise, said Hermann, you have no power to exchange thoughts but with the dead. You hunger for their secrets, but you know not that the grave is a curtain dropped between two worlds. He who uplifts it cannot be of both, save at the price you have to pay. Come. Frederick heard this terrible denunciation with an appalled spirit. He determined to renounce his design. He strove to fling the arm from him. It clung to his hand, as if it had been riveted there with clasps of iron. He endeavoured to tear off the shroud. It seemed to have grown to him, and that it would have been as easy to wrench away his limbs. Herman laughed aloud as he repeated Frederick's own words. "Swear that you will do this. Swear by some oath terrible as the thing itself, and I will pawn my soul to the eternal enemy of man for the pledge of my part in it. Saidest thou so? Dost thou quail already? Summon all that man in thee. For what remains, come. They who wait for us will grow impatient." Herman led the way. Frederick followed with a staggering step. The night was preternaturally dark. It appeared as if they were walking under a thick canopy of black mist which veiled the heavens from their sight. The path that Herman took was through the tangled alleys of the forest, a nearer but more difficult road to the churchyard. He talked, sung, laughed, and acted the whole way the part of a man whose spirits were elated by the prospect of a festal meeting. He jeered Frederick ironically upon what he called his dogged silence. The forest rang with his laughter at every stumble he made, and he bade him note how nimbly he threaded the narrow paths, though he had nor more nor better eyes than himself. Frederick listened to him with feelings which were impossible to describe. It was not Herman he was following. He was sure it was not Herman. It was some fiend in Herman's shape, for Herman was grave, austere, melancholy, never given to gamesome moods, and least of all could Herman, his friend, his brother, almost, exult so like a fiend in the agony of mind he was enduring. They stand beside a grave. Herman sprinkles upon it a powder which falls in sparkles of light from his fingers. The earth begins to heave, and presently as a volcano casts up its ashes, the grave empties itself slowly and slowly, like the rippling waves of a becalmed ocean. It rises to the surface, divides and falls in crumbling heaps on either side. And then there ascends the venerable figure of an aged man, clothed in robes of purple and scarlet, the ensigns of senatorial dignity. At the same moment the spectre arm, by wondrous motion of its own, tears itself aloft and becomes a dimly gleaming torch, each livid finger sending forth pale red dusky flames, which fling a horrid glare upon the cadaverous features of the phantom. I cannot hold him longer than while thy quickened pulse shall beat 100, said Herman in a whisper. In that space thou must master what secrets thou wouldst learn. I know thee, exclaimed Frederick with a faltering voice. You were the traitor, Wolfstein, who conspired against thy prince's life. I saw the headsman execute justice on thee to the last, calling heaven to witness thy innocence, but all men knew thee guilty. One man knew. I was not, said the phantom, and a grim smile grew upon his corpse-like face. And he, rejoined Frederick, shall I name him? Aye, 'twas thy father. Most foully he shed my blood to save his own. The phantom vanished. The grave closed. The pale red dusky flames of the unhallowed torch expired. A yell of exulting voices, as if the fiends of the abyss were triumphing, sounded in the air, and Frederick was again mute. Herman clapped him on the shoulder, exclaiming in a tone of taunting bitterness, Rare secrets, brave secrets, marvellous revelations, for the living. They stand beside a second grave. The same ceremonies, the same effects. The earth heaves, the sepulchre yawns, and the torch of the charnel house up rears itself and burns. The resemblance of a fair, beautiful youth, with radiant eyes and clustering locks, stand before them. "I know thee too," exclaimed Frederick, striving in vain to draw down his arm so that the lurid flame might not gleam upon the shape. "My brother, who died by a brother's hand." "But I was guiltless, dear Francis," rejoined Frederick in a tone of piercing anguish. "My arrow flew at the fierce wolf when thou, crossing its path, received it in thy heart. Did I upbraid thee for my death, as that heart's blood fell upon thee? Were not my words of consolation? Strove I not to soothe the pangs with which that blameless deed of slaughter filled thee? Thou didst, avaunt, hide thee from mine eyes, or I shall grow mad. Oh, I sought not this. Think of the wretched misery our mother bore, whilst thou days and nights didst suffer her to mourn in ignorance my loss. Think what a stain even to this hour lies upon the innocent name of one who lives dishonoured in the suspicion of thy act. Thou canst not redeem the past, but thou mayest make the future witness of thy tardy justice." Frederick had covered his eyes with his hand, unable to look upon the vision. When he withdrew his hand, it was gone. They were again in silence and darkness, but he heard the voice of Herman at his side in the same tone of taunting bitterness, repeating his own words. "Thou saidst truly, my friend, thou hast now read something which the world never read. Oh, those dead! How they answer for themselves, Frederick. 'Tis rare sport to bid them thus arise, to call back speech and memory to the dull clods, to hold their hearts in our hands and peruse them as a book. Truth is not of this world, and they were fools who looked for her in the bottom of a well. Her temple is the grave, her oracles dust and ashes." The scene was changed. They stood beneath the ruined porch of the church. The doors flew open with a rattling sound. They entered. The vast edifice was wrapped in impenetrable gloom, except the little circle of dismal light from the horrible torch. They advanced to the altar, the steps of which Herman ascended alone, silently motioning his companion to remain. He waved his hands over the tall wax tapers that stood upon the table of the altar, when by some strange spell blue forked flames descended upon them, and they burned with dim ghastly flashes that shot forth each moment. By this fitful glare Frederick could perceive all he did and all he looked, for this aspect was now wild, terrific, demon-like. He took the sacramental chalice, and stretching forth his bare arm, cried in a loud voice, "Come, ye viewless ministers of this dread hour, come from this fenny lake, the hanging rock and the midnight cave. The moon is red, the stars are out, the sky is burning, and all nature stands aghast at what we do." Then, replacing the sacred vessel on the altar, he drew one by one from different parts of his body, from his knotted hair, from his bosom, from beneath his nails, the unholy things which he cast into it. "This," said he, "I plucked from the beak of a raven feeding on a murderer's brains. This is from a mad dog's foam. These the spurgings of a dead man's eyes gathered since the rising of the evening star. This is a screech owl's egg. This is a single drop of black blood squeezed from the heart of a sweltered toad. This is an adder's tongue, and here 10 grains of the grey moss that grew upon a skull, which had lain in the charnel house 300 years. What? Not yet. And his eyes seemed like balls of fire as they cast them up. Yes, not yet. I call ye once, I call ye twice, dare ye deny me? Nay, then, as I call ye thrice, I'll wound mine arm, and as it drops, I'll breathe a spell, shall cleave the ground, and drag you here. He held his left arm over the chalice, clutched it with his hand, and, as if the talons of an eagle had infixed themselves, the blood spouted forth. While it dripped into the vessel, he gasped for breath like a strong man fighting hard with his last agonies. Suddenly the tapers were extinguished, and there remained only the fearful glare of that flickered horribly from the unhallowed torch. It reached not to the altar, so Frederick saw not Herman, but he was upon its lowest step. His mother, even as he had seen her the day he returned without his brother, when he spoke not the word that would have spared those long hours of grief, which the mystery of his absence caused to be followed at last by all a mother's heart could feel for the untimely death of a beloved son. He bent his knee in reverential awe before the sacred shade, and his soul grew faint within him. For there was upon that maternal face a sad look of pity and of wrath. He had thoughts that burned for utterance, but he had no tongue to give them utterance. The form spoke. Why hast thou troubled me in death, my son? Why hast thou in life arrayed thee in that garb of death? Why hast thou disturbed my sepulchre for the shroud that enfolds thee? A shriek of horror burst from him, as again he strove but vainly to tear off the sacrilegious spoil of his mother's grave. Son, thou hast sought unholily the secrets of the dead. Hear mine. The canker that preyed upon my life was grief for thee. The forsaken of God are they alone who forsake God. All sinners else may hope to be partakers of his infinite mercies. Thou wert God forsaken. Thou clothest thyself in the pride of thy understanding, said there was no God, and lived as if thou didst believe in thy impiety. I loved thee, for I bare thee. Thou wert my child. But the thorns planted in my heart by the knowledge that my child must perish eternally wounded it to death. The shadow faded away, and again the yell of exulting voices sounded in the ears of Frederick as he lay prostrate on the cold, damp pavement, shedding involuntary tears. They fell from his eyes like drops of molten lead. His brain seemed on fire. He groaned and howled and gnashed his teeth and dashed his face furiously against the stones. He heard the voice of Herman. Oh, the damning chuckle of that voice as he jealously shouted, "Rare secrets! Brave secrets! Marvelous revelations for the living. Since when had such a notion possessed you? Since my mother died." And she died? Oh, ask the doctor. He'll tell you it was of atrophy. I laughed amid my tears to hear them talk. And then it was that I first thought how the dead would answer for themselves. Laugh! Laugh, man! Laugh as I do. Laugh now! Amid thy tears, thou desperate fool! The next morning, Frederick was found a corpse in the Abbey church. the foot of his mother's tomb, leading to the altar. Adolphine told what she knew of the compact between him and Herman, but Herman brought forward 2 fellow students with whom he had passed the preceding evening. His own servant proved that he had retired to bed at 11, where he found him at the usual hour when he went to call him. Herman himself, too, denied that he had ever entered into such a compact, wept for the death of his friend, and triumphed over his accusers. Yet, had he been required to bare his left arm, there would have appeared upon it the fresh blood marks of lacerated flesh, as if torn by an eagle's talon. The Forsaken of God by William Mudford, from this collection, the first corgi book of great Victorian horror stories, Reign of Terror, edited by Michelle Parry, read live on Twitch, and then placed here on YouTube by Gav Cross. Let me know what you thought of the story and of the reading. Don't think I don't know how much I just chewed up the microphone then. I think the Gothic deserves a bit of melodrama. Don't you? Don't you? Do you?